The unthinkable has just happened, and the global financial order as we know it is effectively dead. Just minutes ago, shockwaves tore through the global markets as the U.S. Treasury announced an unprecedented and catastrophic move. They have officially initiated the process of locking Canada out of the U.S. dollar clearing system. This is not a drill, and it is not a minor trade dispute. This is the United States turning the ultimate financial weapon on its closest neighbor, its largest trading partner, and its most integrated geopolitical ally. For decades, we were told that the weaponization of the dollar was reserved only for rogue states and hostile regimes. We were assured that the SWIFT system and dollar dominance were safe havens for Western democracies. That illusion has just been shattered completely. Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, has immediately fired back, calling this an act of sheer economic warfare. He has signaled that Canada will not simply bow down, but will instead trigger a series of financial countermeasures that will rock Wall Street to its core. The truth they are hiding is that this has nothing to do with simple trade disagreements or border policies. This is about a desperate empire trying to maintain control over a fracturing financial system. If they can ban Canada from the dollar, your bank account, your savings, and your purchasing power are no longer safe. To understand why Washington just pressed the nuclear button on the Canadian economy, we have to look away from the North American border. We have to connect the dots between three massive global events that the mainstream media is desperately trying to keep separate. First, look at the quiet but aggressive expansion of the BRICS financial alternative. Over the past year, we have seen nations holding massive resource wealth actively designing a non-dollar trading ledger. But what the public does not know is that behind closed doors, Canadian financial elites have been quietly hedging their bets. Canada is one of the most resource-rich nations on the planet, holding vast reserves of oil, uranium, fresh water, and critical minerals. When the U.S. dollar's inflation began to hollow out purchasing power, rumors began swirling in elite banking circles that Canada was exploring bilateral commodity settlements outside of the traditional U.S. dollar framework. Washington saw this not as a financial hedge, but as an existential betrayal. The second hidden connection is the recent turbulence in the euro-dollar market. The euro-dollar market, the vast offshore system of U.S. dollars held outside the United States, is the actual engine of global trade. Recently, massive liquidity black holes have appeared in this system, threatening to collapse European and Asian banking institutions. Canada's highly centralized banking oligopoly holds massive exposure to these offshore dollar markets. In a bid to protect their domestic economy from a cascading U.S. liquidity crisis, Canadian regulators under Carney's ideological influence began quietly stress testing a decoupling mechanism. They began building backdoor swap lines with European and Asian central banks that completely bypassed the Federal Reserve. The U.S. Treasury realized that if Canada successfully demonstrated that a G7 nation could clear global trades without the U.S. dollar, the entire house of cards would collapse. It would signal to Japan, the UK, and Europe that they too could survive without Washington's financial permission. The third and most dangerous connection lies in the global energy reset. For 50 years, the petrodollar agreement ensured that every drop of oil traded globally required U.S. dollars. But as the Middle East pivots toward Asia, that system is rapidly disintegrating. Canada's massive energy sector, heavily concentrated in Alberta, has been seeking new markets to avoid selling at a discount to the United States. Recently, quiet negotiations accelerated regarding the pricing of Canadian crude and liquefied natural gas in alternative digital baskets. By threatening to lock Canada out of the dollar, the U.S. Treasury is attempting to force Canadian energy to remain completely captive to U.S. markets. They are building an invisible fence around North American resources to ensure they only feed the American machine. This is a hostile takeover of a sovereign nation's resource wealth, disguised as a regulatory enforcement action. The U.S. Treasury knows that if they lose control over the pricing mechanism of North American energy, the inflation crisis inside the United States will go hyperparabolic. Every piece of data points to a desperate panic within the halls of the Eccles building and the U.S. Treasury. They are not acting from a position of strength. They are acting from a position of absolute terror. They are willing to burn down the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement overnight, just to maintain their grip on the global reserve currency. This hidden war for the very lifeblood of the global economy has finally spilled out into the open. This historic collision is not just a clash of nations. It is a brutal chess match between deeply entrenched power syndicates. On one side, you have the U.S. Treasury currently operating as the financial enforcement arm of the American security state. Their mandate is clear: defend the U.S. dollar's hegemony at absolutely any cost. They view the weaponization of the clearing system as their ultimate leverage, a tool they believe makes them invincible. The Treasury officials driving this ban are the exact same architects who engineered the freezing of Russian sovereign reserves in 2022. They became intoxicated by the sheer power of clicking a button and erasing a nation's access to its own wealth. But they made a fatal miscalculation by turning that exact same weapon on a G7 ally. They assumed Canada, historically polite and economically subservient, would simply capitulate and accept new draconian financial terms. They did not anticipate the ferocious counter-strike from the opposing power player, the international banking establishment, now verbally spearheaded by Mark Carney. Carney is not just a former central banker. He is a heavy hitter in the world of global finance, deeply connected to the Bank for International Settlements in Basel. When Carney fires back, he is not just speaking for Ottawa. He is broadcasting a warning from the global financial elite. Carney's network understands that if the U.S. can arbitrarily ban Canada from the dollar, no sovereign bond market on earth is safe. He is mobilizing a coalition of institutional investors, sovereign wealth funds, and global asset managers to immediately begin dumping U.S. treasuries. This is the exact financial warfare scenario the Pentagon has wargamed for decades, but it is happening from within the Western alliance. Carney has pointed out the devastating hypocrisy of the U.S. position. He highlighted that this unilateral Treasury action violates every foundational principle of the international rules-based order Washington claims to protect. We are watching a civil war within the Western financial system. The Federal Reserve is now caught directly in the crossfire of this brutal power struggle. The Fed knows that weaponizing the dollar against Canada will immediately shatter the confidence of foreign creditors. If foreign central banks believe their dollar assets can be frozen over bilateral disputes, they will accelerate their dumping of U.S. debt. This puts the Federal Reserve in an impossible position: monetize the resulting massive debt wave and trigger hyperinflation, or let interest rates skyrocket and crash the U.S. economy. Meanwhile, you have the corporate titans of Wall Street and Bay Street screaming into their phones. Multinational corporations that operate seamlessly across the 49th parallel are suddenly facing an existential clearing crisis. Auto manufacturers in Michigan rely on parts from Ontario. Tech firms in California rely on rare earths mined in the Canadian Shield. The U.S. Treasury has essentially thrown a wrench into the gears of a fully integrated, multi-trillion-dollar continental machine. The power players in Washington believe they were surgically excising a threat. Instead, they have detonated a financial dirty bomb inside their own house. Mark Carney's defiant response signals that the era of uncontested American financial dictation is over. The battle lines are drawn, and neither side can afford to back down without losing their total grip on the future of money. This is where the geopolitical chess game crashes violently through your front door. Make no mistake, this dollar ban is going to fundamentally devastate the economic reality of the average citizen. Let us start with the immediate shock to the supply chain. The U.S. and Canada exchange billions of dollars in goods and services every single day. If Canadian banks cannot clear transactions in U.S. dollars, cross-border trade instantly seizes up. Trucks will sit idle at the Ambassador Bridge. Freight trains will be halted at the border because letters of credit can no longer be verified or settled. Within exactly 72 hours of this ban taking full effect, you will see catastrophic shortages on supermarket shelves. Canada is a massive supplier of agricultural products, fertilizer, and raw food materials to the United States. When those shipments stop, the price of basic groceries will surge by double digits in a matter of days. But the true nightmare scenario lies in the energy markets. The United States imports more oil from Canada than from any other nation on Earth. Refineries in the Midwest and the Gulf Coast are entirely calibrated to process heavy Canadian crude. If those energy companies cannot legally pay their Canadian counterparts in dollars, the flow of oil will be aggressively choked off. Gasoline prices at your local pump will instantly spike, easily breaking previous historical records. You will be paying a staggering premium for energy simply because Washington decided to weaponize the currency. And for Canadians, the fallout is equally, if not more, terrifying. The Canadian dollar, stripped of its ability to easily interact with the global reserve currency, faces an immediate, violently volatile devaluation. The cost of importing consumer goods, technology, and winter produce will skyrocket, destroying the purchasing power of the Canadian middle class. But Mark Carney's counteroffensive means the pain will be weaponized right back at the American consumer. If Canada retaliates by slapping massive exit taxes on raw materials or demanding payment in gold or a neutral digital asset, U.S. manufacturing will hit a brick wall. Lumber prices will explode, completely freezing the U.S. housing market and bankrupting construction firms overnight. This is not a slow recession. This is an engineered, instantaneous economic depression. Furthermore, consider your retirement accounts, your 401k, your pension. These funds are deeply interconnected, holding equities in both U.S. and Canadian multinational corporations. As revenue projections for these companies collapse due to frozen trade lines, stock markets will experience a terrifying wave of panic selling. Trillions of dollars in middle-class wealth will evaporate from the ledger simply because of this reckless Treasury mandate. We are looking at a scenario where capital controls become an absolute, undeniable reality. Governments will panic as citizens try to move their money into physical assets like gold, silver, and self-custodied Bitcoin. To stop the bank runs, limits will be placed on how much of your own money you can withdraw or transfer. The economic fallout of this event proves that your money is not truly yours. It is merely a rented digital credit subject to the whims and the desperate geopolitical temper tantrums of unelected officials. The financial blast radius of this single decision will ensure that the cost of living for the working class will never ever return to normal. The data is clear, and the next 30 days are going to be a masterclass in financial chaos. Here is exactly what the models are predicting as this unprecedented crisis accelerates. Within the next 48 hours, we will see emergency closed-door meetings at the G20 level. European leaders will panic, terrified that they could be the next target of a U.S. Treasury dollar ban if they step out of line. By the end of week 1, expect to see extreme volatility in the foreign exchange markets, unlike anything witnessed since the 2008 financial crisis. The Canadian government will be forced to implement emergency liquidity measures to keep their domestic banking sector from freezing entirely. Mark Carney and his international allies will officially unveil a temporary alternative settlement mechanism. This will likely involve a massive coordinated use of central bank gold reserves to underwrite emergency trade between Canada and Europe. By week 2, the reality of the supply chain collapse will hit the American heartland. We will see targeted rolling shutdowns of auto plants in Ohio and Michigan as critical Canadian parts fail to arrive. The mainstream media will try to blame these shortages on logistical glitches, but the smart money will know it is the direct result of the dollar ban. By week 3, the massive dump of U.S. Treasuries by frightened foreign central banks will force the Federal Reserve's hand. Yields on the 10-year Treasury will spike violently, driving mortgage rates to completely unsustainable levels. The Fed will have to step in with emergency yield curve control, printing trillions of new dollars just to buy their own debt. This will ignite a terrifying new wave of inflation that will completely eclipse everything we have seen over the past few years. By day 30, the United States will find itself increasingly isolated on the global stage. The dollar ban on Canada will be universally recognized as a historic blunder, the exact moment the U.S. destroyed trust in its own currency. Nations worldwide will accelerate their adoption of alternative currencies, permanently shattering the dollar's global monopoly. The next month will rewrite the rules of global finance. The true cost of this historic action is not just measured in lost trade or spiked inflation. The true cost is the complete and permanent destruction of financial trust in the Western world. By banning Canada from the dollar, the U.S. Treasury has shown every nation, every corporation, and every individual that the dollar is no longer a safe haven. It is a weapon, and it can be pointed at anyone at any time, for any reason. Mark Carney's fierce pushback proves that the rest of the world will not simply surrender. We are witnessing the violent birth of a fractured, multipolar financial system. You need to prepare immediately because the economic shockwaves from this decision are heading straight for your bank account. If you are holding all your wealth in paper currency, you are standing directly in the line of fire. What do you think is the real reason Washington turned on its closest ally? Do you think Canada has the power to break the dollar system, or will they be crushed by the U.S. Treasury? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you want the unfiltered truth, and subscribe to outsmart the chaos they are bringing to our doorsteps.